The arrow whistled past Sarah's ear, embedding itself in the oak beam behind her with a violent thud. She didn't flinch. After 3 years of living alone in this God-forsaken territory, death had become as familiar as the morning frost. What she hadn't expected was to find it lying half-drowned by Miller's Creek, wrapped in the torn remnants of a Kiowa dress, breathing like a wounded sparrow. The sun hung low over the Nebraska plains, painting the sky in shades of amber and blood. Sarah McKinnon walked the familiar path to the creek, her weathered boots crunching against the autumn leaves. At 42, she moved with the careful precision of someone who had learned that survival meant noticing everything. The way the grass bent in the wind, the silence where birdsong should be, the subtle shift in shadows that might mean danger. She had been walking this path for 3 years now, ever since the massacre at Clearwater Ridge had taken her husband Thomas and left her the sole survivor of what had once been a thriving settlement. The other survivors had fled east, back to civilization, back to safety. But Sarah couldn't leave. Not when Thomas was buried in the small cemetery they'd carved from the rocky soil, not when their unborn dreams still whispered to her in the wind. The creek came into view, its waters running clear and cold over the smooth stones. Sarah knelt to fill her water bucket, the familiar ritual grounding her in the present moment. That's when she saw her. A child, perhaps 12 or 13, lay crumpled on the far bank like a broken doll. Her long black hair was matted with mud and blood, her small frame shivering violently despite the warmth of the evening. The traditional Kiowa dress she wore was torn and stained, and her feet were bare and bleeding. Sarah's heart stopped. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away, to pretend she hadn't seen anything. The Kiowa had been at war with the white settlers for decades, and harboring one of their children, even a dying one, would be seen as an act of supreme betrayal by both sides. But as she stared at the girl's pale face, Sarah saw something that made her chest tighten with recognition. The child's features were delicate, almost European, with high cheekbones and skin that spoke of mixed heritage. And in her delirium, she was whispering words in broken English. "Mama, please, didn't mean to." Papa said, "Sorry." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision settle on her shoulders like a yoke. She thought of Thomas, of the children they had planned to have, of the nursery they had started building before the massacre. She thought of the emptiness that had consumed her these past 3 years, the way she had learned to live with grief as a constant companion. When she opened her eyes, the choice was already made. Wading across the shallow creek, Sarah knelt beside the girl and gently placed a hand on her forehead. The child was burning with fever, her breathing shallow and rapid. Carefully, Sarah lifted her into her arms, surprised by how light she was, how fragile. "It's all right, sweetheart," she whispered, though she knew the girl couldn't hear her. "You're safe now." The walk back to her cabin felt like a journey through a minefield. Sarah's eyes constantly scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of watchers. The Kiowa were skilled trackers, and if they were looking for this child, they would find her trail eventually. Her cabin sat in a small clearing, surrounded by the vegetable garden she had stubbornly maintained despite the isolation. It was a modest structure, built by Thomas's hands, but it was solid and warm. Sarah kicked open the door and laid the girl on her own bed, the first person to occupy it since Thomas's death. For the next several hours, Sarah worked with the desperate efficiency of someone fighting death itself. She cleaned the girl's wounds, noting with growing concern the deep gash on her forehead and the bruises that covered her arms and legs. Someone had hurt this child, and recently, as she worked, the girl's fevered whispers painted a picture that made Sarah's blood run cold. The child spoke of her father, a man named Joseph Running Bear, who had been cast out by his own tribe for some terrible betrayal. She spoke of hiding, of running, of the men who had come in the night. Papa said, "Find the white woman, by the creek," the girl murmured, her eyes fluttering open for a moment. Said, "She lost everything too, would understand." Sarah's hand stilled. "What's your name, child?" "Mary. Mary Running Bear, but Papa called me Little Sparrow." The name hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had heard it before, whispered in the trading posts and settlements. Joseph Running Bear, the half-breed scout who had guided wagon trains through Kiowa territory for years before his exile. The man who had allegedly betrayed his own people to save white settlers, becoming a pariah to both worlds, and now his daughter lay dying in Sarah's bed, sent to her by a father who somehow knew about the woman by the creek who had lost everything. As dawn broke over the plains, Sarah sat vigil beside the girl's bed, her mind racing. Mary's fever had broken during the night, and she was sleeping peacefully for the first time. But Sarah knew that their reprieve was temporary. The Kiowa would come looking for the daughter of a traitor, and when they found her, the sound of horses approaching broke through her thoughts like thunder. Sarah's blood turned to ice as she peered through the cabin's single window. 6 warriors sat mounted in her yard, their faces painted for war, their weapons gleaming in the morning light. Sarah had seen enough Kiowa war parties to know that this was no casual visit. These men had come for blood. Taking a deep breath, Sarah stepped outside, her hands raised to show she was unarmed. The leader of the group, a man with silver streaking his black hair and scars crisscrossing his chest, dismounted and approached her. "You are the woman who lives alone by the creek," he said in accented English. His voice was deep and carefully controlled, but Sarah could hear the barely contained rage beneath it. "I am Sarah McKinnon," she replied, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I am Black Hawk, war chief of the Kiowa nation. You have something that belongs to us." Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. "I have nothing that belongs to anyone but myself." Black Hawk's eyes narrowed. "The daughter of the traitor Joseph Running Bear was seen fleeing toward this place. She carries the blood of betrayal in her veins, and she must answer for her father's crimes. She's just a child," Sarah said, the words torn from her heart. "She is the seed of a traitor," Black Hawk replied coldly. "As are you for giving her shelter. The council has decided. You will both die with the sunrise." Sarah felt the world tilt around her. In the distance she could hear Mary stirring in the cabin, her small voice calling out weakly. The sound galvanized her, filling her with a fierce protectiveness she hadn't felt since Thomas's death. "Wait," she said, stepping forward. "Before you pass judgment, hear me out. I know your people value stories, value the truth spoken from the heart. Give me that chance." Black Hawk studied her for a long moment, then nodded to his warriors. They remained mounted but lowered their weapons slightly. "You may speak," he said, "but know that words will not save you from justice." Sarah took a shaking breath and began. 3 years ago, I lived in a settlement called Clearwater Ridge. It was a small place, but it was home. I lived there with my husband Thomas, and we were building a life together. We had plans, dreams of children, of a future." She paused, the memories washing over her like a tide. "One night, raiders came. They killed everyone, men, women, children. They burned our homes, destroyed everything we had built. I survived only because I was at the creek, washing clothes by moonlight. I heard the screams, saw the flames, but by the time I reached the settlement, it was too late." Black Hawk's expression remained impassive, but Sarah caught a flicker of something in his eyes. "I found my husband's body in the ruins of our home. He had died trying to protect the children who had taken shelter there. In his arms was a little girl, maybe 8 years old. Her name was Emma, and she had the most beautiful laugh." Sarah's voice broke, but she forced herself to continue. "I buried them all, every last one, and then I sat in those ruins and wished I had died with them. But I didn't die. I lived, and I've spent every day since then, asking myself why." She looked directly at Black Hawk, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yesterday, I found your answer. A child, broken and alone, left to die by a creek, a little girl who had already lost everything, just like I had. When I saw her lying there, I didn't see a Kiowa, or a white child, or the daughter of a traitor. I saw Emma. I saw every child who had died needlessly in this war between our peoples." Mary appeared in the doorway of the cabin, leaning heavily against the frame. She was pale and weak, but her eyes were clear and focused on the conversation. "I know what her father did," Sarah continued. "I know he's been cast out by your people, but she's not her father. She's an innocent child, who has already suffered more than any person should. If you want to punish someone for the crimes of the past, punish me. I'm the one who chose to shelter her. I'm the one who couldn't turn away from a dying child." Black Hawk's jaw tightened. "You speak of suffering, white woman, but you know nothing of our pain. Joseph Running Bear guided your people through our sacred lands, helped them steal our hunting grounds, betrayed the trust of his own blood. His daughter carries that betrayal in her veins. Does she?" Sarah asked quietly. "Or does she carry the possibility of something better?" Before Black Hawk could respond, Mary stepped forward. Her legs were shaking, but she held herself with quiet dignity. "I am Mary Running Bear," she said, her voice stronger than Sarah had expected. "I am the daughter of Joseph Running Bear, and I know what my father did." The warriors shifted restlessly, but Black Hawk held up a hand for silence. "My father told me the story many times," Mary continued. "He guided the wagon train through Kiowa territory because he believed it would prevent a war. He thought that if he could help the white settlers find a peaceful path, there would be no need for bloodshed. He was wrong." Tears began to stream down her face, but she didn't stop speaking. "His choice led to more death, more pain. The settlers took the land he showed them, and war came anyway. My father has lived with that guilt every day since, and so have I." She turned to Sarah, her eyes filled with gratitude and love. "But this woman, this stranger, she saw me dying and she chose to save me. Not because of my blood or my father's crimes, but because I was a child who needed help. She gave me the one thing I never expected to find again: kindness." Mary walked slowly toward Black Hawk, her small frame dwarfed by his imposing presence. "If you must punish someone for my father's betrayal, punish me, but don't punish her." She has already lost everything to this war. Don't let her lose her life too. Black Hawk stared down at the girl, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire, filled with the weight of years of conflict and pain. You would die for this white woman, he asked finally. She would die for me, Mary replied simply. That's what mothers do. The word hung in the air like a prayer. Sarah felt her heart constrict, overwhelmed by the simple truth of it. In the space of a single night, this broken child had become her daughter in every way that mattered. Black Hawk looked from Mary to Sarah, his weathered face reflecting a struggle between duty and something deeper. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more thoughtful. My own daughter was killed in a raid 2 summers ago, he said quietly. She was Mary's age. Her name was Little Dove, and she had the bravest heart of any warrior I knew. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she began to understand. She died protecting other children from white raiders. Black Hawk continued. With her last breath, she asked me to remember that courage comes in many forms, that sometimes the greatest bravery is choosing love over hate. He knelt before Mary, bringing himself to her eye level. Your father's betrayal caused great pain to our people, but you are not your father. And this woman, he looked at Sarah, this woman has shown you the mercy that war has forgotten. Black Hawk stood and walked to Sarah, stopping just in front of her. You could have let her die, he said. It would have been safer, wiser. But you chose to save her anyway. Why? Sarah met his gaze steadily. Because she reminded me of all the children I'll never have. Because in a world full of death, choosing life is the only thing that makes sense. Because love is the only thing stronger than grief. For a long moment, the war chief studied her face. Then, slowly, he nodded. The council sent me to execute the daughter of a traitor, he said. But I see no traitor here. I see only a mother and daughter who have found each other in the darkness. He turned to his warriors and spoke in rapid Kiowa. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but she could see the surprise and confusion on their faces. After a heated exchange, the warriors gradually nodded their agreement. Black Hawk returned to Sarah and Mary, his expression solemn but no longer threatening. The Kiowa nation recognizes that some debts can only be paid with love, he said formally. Mary Running Bear, you are no longer an exile. You are a child who has found her place in the world. And Sarah McKinnon, you are no longer a stranger in our territory. You are a woman who has proven that the heart knows no boundaries. Mary collapsed into Sarah's arms, sobbing with relief and joy. Sarah held her tightly, feeling the empty spaces in her heart begin to fill with something she had thought lost forever, hope. As the warriors prepared to leave, Black Hawk approached Sarah one final time. There is something you should know, he said quietly. The raiders who destroyed your settlement, they were not Kiowa. They were white men, dressed as Indians, trying to start a war between our peoples. Your husband died protecting children from men of his own race. Sarah's knees nearly buckled. How do you know this? Because Joseph Running Bear tracked them down and brought us proof. It was his final act of redemption, his attempt to prevent the war his earlier betrayal had helped cause. He died bringing us the truth. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All these years she had lived with the assumption that her husband had died in a racial conflict, that the hatred between their peoples was inevitable. But the truth was far more complex, far more tragic. The girl doesn't know, Black Hawk continued. She believes her father died in exile, shamed and alone. Perhaps it is time she learned that he died a hero. As the war party rode away, Sarah and Mary stood together in the doorway of the cabin, watching the sun climb higher in the sky. The child leaned against Sarah's side, her head fitting perfectly under Sarah's arm. What happens now? Mary asked softly. Sarah looked down at her, this brave, wounded child who had become her daughter in the space of a single night. Now we heal, she said simply. We build a life together. We plant a garden, and tell stories, and remember that love is stronger than fear. Mary nodded, then looked up at Sarah with eyes that held wisdom far beyond her years. My father always said that every ending is also a beginning, she said. I think he was right. Sarah smiled, feeling the truth of it in her bones. The war between their peoples was far from over, but in this small corner of the world, 2 wounded hearts had found healing in each other. And perhaps, in a world torn apart by hatred and fear, that was the most revolutionary act of all. As they walked back into the cabin together, Sarah thought about the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. She had lost a husband and gained a daughter. Mary had lost a father and gained a mother. And in their shared loss they had found something precious, the understanding that love transcends every boundary that hatred tries to build. The embrace that had saved them both was more than a gesture of protection. It was a declaration that family is not determined by blood or race or history, but by the choice to love unconditionally, to see the humanity in others, even when the world insists on seeing only differences. In the years that followed, Sarah and Mary would face many challenges. There would be those who questioned their unusual family, who saw danger in their crossing of racial lines. But they would also find allies, people who understood that love is the most powerful force for healing in a broken world. Their story would spread across the frontier, whispered around campfires and in trading posts. The tale of the white woman and the Kiowa girl, who proved that courage comes in many forms, sometimes in the taking up of weapons, but more often in the laying down of them. Sometimes in the choosing of sides, but more often in the refusal to choose hatred over love. And in the end, that single embrace between two wounded souls would be remembered not as a moment of weakness or sentiment, but as the beginning of something new, a small crack in the wall of hatred that had divided their peoples for generations, letting in just enough light to show the way forward. For love, they discovered, is not bound by the accidents of birth or the wounds of history. It is a choice made every day, in every moment, when we decide to see the sacred in the stranger, the family in the other, the possibility of redemption in the most unlikely places. The war between the Kiowa and the white settlers would continue for years to come. But in one small cabin by a creek in Nebraska, two hearts had chosen a different path. And sometimes, that is how peace begins. Not with grand gestures or treaties, but with the simple decision to save a life, to offer shelter to the lost, to embrace the possibility that love is stronger than fear. In the end, that is the only victory that truly matters. Not the conquest of land or the defeat of enemies, but the triumph of the human heart over the forces that would divide us. The understanding that we are all, in our deepest essence, children who need shelter, love, and the chance to begin again. Sarah and Mary had found their beginning in each other, and in a world that often seemed determined to tear itself apart, they had chosen to build something beautiful together. A family forged not in blood but in love, a home where healing was possible, and a future where the old divisions might finally give way to something better. The embrace that ended their war was also the embrace that began their peace. And perhaps in the end, that is the most profound truth of all, that love has the power to transform not just individual hearts, but the very world we inhabit, one embrace at a time.